This is an ABP Life podcast.
You know, when I was looking for a new PG in Noida, a PG owner continuously said that there's 24-hour Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi recharge is done for a whole year. Wi-Fi speed is top-notch. It was like the MSP of the PG was its Wi-Fi, and I actually saw less of the room and got swayed by the Wi-Fi connectivity of the PG. I remember he said that data is the new currency, and since all the boys in the PG are corporate workers, Wi-Fi is very important. And honestly, I couldn't agree more. In this globalized world, data is the key. Data is power. Data is the alpha and the omega. Because any company, or let's say any country who has data will enjoy a dominance in geopolitics and economy like no other. Now, speaking of data, all the countries around the world have been constantly framing the structure of their data protection. And similarly, India has come up with a new draft Digital Personal Data Protection Bill. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology introduced the new draft bill on Friday and has invited the public to add recommendation on it till December 17. However, it's interesting to know that the government had withdrawn the previous draft data protection bill in August this year. But now the question is, why was the old bill withdrawn? What does the revamped bill say? And will this draft bill change and solidify data protection in this country? Let's decode all of this today. So welcome to Clear Cut, only on ABP Life podcast. This is your newsman Rudrashish, and today let's talk about the draft Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2022. So let's get started. So, the government on Friday released the draft of a new comprehensive data protection bill for public view, months after withdrawing a previous bill. India had in early August withdrawn the Personal Data Protection Bill. The much debated bill introduced in 2019 had alarmed big tech firms such as Google and Facebook parent Meta. Now, the main purpose of this act is to provide for the processing of digital personal data in a manner that recognizes both the right of the individuals to protect their personal data and the need to process personal data for lawful purposes and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Now, as I said earlier, the previous draft bill was withdrawn in August. The 2019 draft bill was drafted by Justice B.N. Srikrishna Committee and was presented in the Lok Sabha in 2019. Now, after the bill was introduced in 2019, it was subject to a lot of criticism from the stakeholders. Now, the main point of criticism in the 2019 draft bill was that the bill had proposed strict data localization norms for storage and processing, which eventually was a big burden for the tech companies. The 2019 bill was also criticized for not giving importance to protecting the right to privacy for users. Because of being subject to such criticism, the bill was referred to a joint parliamentary committee for scrutiny. As a matter of fact, this is the fourth repetition of India's data protection bill. Now let's talk about the new draft bill. What does the new draft bill say? Now, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology said in a statement that the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill is a legislation that frames out the rights and duties of the citizen on one hand and the obligations to use collected data lawfully of their data fiduciary on the other hand. Now, you might be thinking, what is data fiduciary, right? So, data fiduciary is an entity or individual who decides the means and purposes of processing personal data. Such processing will be subject to certain purpose, collection and storage limitations. For instance, personal data can be processed only for specific, clear and lawful purposes. Now, the bill aims to establish a data protection board by the central government and also intends to appoint data protection officers in every data fiduciaries of businesses to ensure their compliance to the law. The new bill also says that the data principals shall have the right to get their data corrected or even deleted. The new bill has also relaxed the localization rules for cross-border data flow. Moreover, the bill says that the central government will have the power to exempt any of its agencies to adhere to the provisions of the bill in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of the country. And finally, one of the most important points of the bill is that if companies or data fiduciaries compromise the data of the users, then they will have to pay a fine ranging from Rs 50 crore to Rs 500 crore. Consumers who submit wrong documents will have to pay a fine of Rs 10,000. So all in all, the new draft Digital Personal Data Protection Bill might be a step in the right direction in a world where data is the key, the new currency. Now, to speak further on this, we have renowned Supreme Court advocate specialized in the field of cyber law, cybercrime law, cybersecurity law, and artificial intelligence, Mr. Pawan Duggal, joining us on the show today. So, welcome to Clear Cut, sir. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you on your show. Thanks.
Same here, sir. So, the government retracted the 2019 draft Personal Data Protection Bill in August this year. Why do you think the government withdrew it? What, according to you, are the main reasons?
Well, the government primarily withdrew the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 because of the very exhaustive report that the Joint Parliamentary Committee had actually come up. When the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 was presented to Parliament, the Parliament referred it to a Joint Parliamentary Committee. The Joint Parliamentary Committee almost deliberated on this bill for about 2 years and then came up with its report in December 2021. Now,
yes.
When one looks at this particular report, it is basically divided into two broad elements. The first is the majority report of the committee, where the various provisions of the Personal Data Protection Bill were found to be fine, but various new amendments were proposed so as to make the bill more topical and relevant. But the second component of the bill was consisting of various dissent notes that had actually been put up by various members of the Joint Parliamentary Committee who did not agree with the majority report of the committee.
Okay.
But in a nutshell, about 91 plus amendments were recommended to the central government that they should make these amendments in order to make the Personal Data Protection Bill more topical, relevant, and more practical oriented. So once this report came to the government potentially realized that if you were to put in all those amendments into the Personal Data Protection Bill, that could change the very intrinsic character of the bill. And then that could effectively not really achieve the desired objectives.
Okay.
And that is the reason why the government decided, let's withdraw this bill and let's now come up with a new avatar of this bill. And consequently now, this Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2022 has been released in the public domain for public comment for a month.
Okay. I guess this is the fourth iteration of the draft protection bill, data protection bill. And I think what distinguishes this new draft bill from the 2019 bill? And what is the new bill's intended outcome?
Well, the new bill is a distinctive animal in its own self as compared to the 2019 legislation.
Okay.
Why? Because the 2019 Personal Data Protection Bill was very, very broad, was trying to cover a large number of elements within an element of its own legislation. But when one looks at now the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2022, one finds a marked difference between the two legislations. This draft bill is far more concise, abridged, focused only on one particular element, which is protection and preservation of the personal data of individuals. A lot of other elements which were extraneous to this issue have been taken away. It's a very short draft bill, about 30 plus kind of sections. And when one looks at the entire this new draft bill, one finds that almost the first 18 sections of the draft bill talk about some substantive provisions, and then we talk of a new data protection board that's going to be coming in and adjudicating. But when I look at the comparison between the 2019 data protection bill and the 2022 data protection bill, I find sea of a difference. Under the 2019 bill, you could potentially be fined a particular percentage of your total annual gross turnover. But right now, for the first time in the history of independent India, we now have a draft legislation that's talking about invoking pecuniary fines. And the fines can be up to 500 crore rupees per incident. Now that's unheard of in a legislative instrument. Yes, we have seen the Competition Commission of India actually going ahead and imposing fines totaling about a couple of thousand crore rupees against certain service providers. But in a legislation, this kind of stuff has been unheard of. So to that extent, it's a great step forward in terms of evolution of the law of torts in the country in the context of data protection per se. And mind you, it uses the word pecuniary fine up to 500 crores per incident. So per instance, so if there's more than one instance, then you just multiply the same. So clearly, for the first time, this bill is focusing on the language which is understood by the businesses of the country. They realize that if they are going to lose their money, they're going to be very well going forward and ensuring compliance with the law, which will, if not complied, will actually land them into losing money. So if any company is facing the entire possibility of having to pay 500 crore rupees fine, I think a majority of the companies are going to be wiped out, or their businesses are going to be seriously impaired or impacted. Sorry. So as a result, I think there will be increasing focus now on compliance because of this very immense kind of pecuniary penalty or fine that's now being proposed. Of course, in some cases, you can be fined up to 150 crore rupees. Sometimes you can be fined up to 200 crore rupees. But for any one particular instance or an incident, it's only up to a maximum of 500 crore rupees fine. But here lies the catch. Fines are invariably going to be given to the state, because when you make a fine or when you levy a fine, it goes to the coffers of the state. So this amount of money may ultimately come up and start enriching the coffers of the state. But will it provide effective remedies or effective redress mechanisms to persons who are victims of these data breaches? That's a big question that will have to be looked at in the coming time.
That's for the time to tell. And now, lastly, sir, strict data protection rules are known to exist in places like China and the European Union. And China's personal information protection law, which is viewed as a parallel to the EU's law, and gives users an express right to access, store, update and erase personal data gathered by corporations. So it is a good way to utilize here. So can India learn from these international practices?
I think there's a very good case for India to learn from the learnings and international best practices of other countries who are looking at data protection. Till now, it's only been the GDPR or the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union which has seemed to have inspired the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019. But it's important to look at other approaches at data protection in other countries. We have to realize that a mere cut, copy, paste does not really work in the Indian ecosystem. Because when you do that, you actually introduce alien concepts which may or may not necessarily work in the context of the Indian ecosystem. But clearly, as you go forward, I think it will be very imperative that India learn from these very experiences so that it can come up with a more cogent, customized, Indianized approach on data protection, primarily because we have come up from a society that's a joint family system-based society where sharing has been the norm of the day. So treating data as property, treating data as something valuable is something that Indians are only learning with the passing times. But yes, India will do a lot of benefit to its own cause if it learns from the experiences of other countries and then tries to replicate those experiences in the Indian context after Indianizing the same.
All right. Well, sir, thank you so much for your precious time. It was lovely speaking to you on this issue.
Pleasure meeting and pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
So that's all the news and scoops I have for you today. This episode was produced by Lalit. This is your newsman Rudrashish Kanjilal signing off. Have a wonderful day ahead and keep listening to ABP Live podcasts.
This is an ABP Live podcast.